The town of Maple Ridge had a quiet way of deciding who belonged and who did not, and Daniel Brooks had long been placed on the wrong side of that invisible line, a man spoken about in lowered voices and careful pauses, a farmer whose land stretched wide and open while his reputation stayed narrow and closed, shaped by rumors no one could fully confirm, but everyone believed, and Emily Carter knew all of this before she ever saw him, because in small towns stories travel faster than truth. Especially stories about a man who lived alone, worked hard, and kept to himself. Emily herself was not new to quiet judgment, though hers was different, softer, hidden behind polite smiles and a marriage that looked stable from the outside but felt hollow within. 12 years married to Mark Carter. A good man by most standards, dependable and calm, yet slowly absent in ways that hurt more than anger ever could. And Emily had learned to move through her days carefully, not asking for too much. Not expecting warmth where none was offered, until the afternoon her car stalled on a narrow road near the edge of Daniel's farmland, rain falling steadily, phone battery drained, the world suddenly small and inconvenient. And as she sat there gripping the steering wheel, she felt the familiar mix of frustration and helplessness, emotions she had grown used to swallowing, when a pickup truck slowed and stopped, the engine humming softly before cutting off, and the man who stepped out matched the picture she had seen only from a distance: tall, broad-shouldered, worn jacket, eyes serious but not unkind, and for a brief moment Emily considered pretending she was fine, waving him away, because this was Daniel Brooks, the man every woman avoided, but something in the way he stood there, not invading her space, not staring, just waiting, made her lower the window, and his voice when he spoke was calm and respectful, asking if she needed help without curiosity or judgment, and she nodded. Unsure why she trusted him, watching as he lifted the hood and worked with steady focus, rain soaking his sleeves as if he didn't notice, and during those minutes no words were exchanged, yet Emily felt strangely at ease, more at ease than she had felt with Mark in months, maybe years, and when the engine finally turned over and the car came back to life, relief rushed through her, but it was mixed with disappointment she didn't understand, because part of her wanted the moment to last longer. Wanted to ask questions she didn't yet have words for, and Daniel simply stepped back, wiped his hands, and told her to drive safely, saying her name like it was something natural, familiar, and Emily froze for half a second, confused, wondering how he knew who she was, before remembering the Carter name still carried weight in town, even if it carried little warmth at home, and she thanked him, drove away, and tried to push the encounter out of her mind, telling herself it was nothing, just a kind stranger doing what anyone decent would do. Yet that night as she lay in bed beside Mark, listening to his slow, distant breathing as he turned away without noticing the space between them, Emily found her thoughts drifting back to Daniel's quiet presence, the way he hadn't tried to impress her or fill the silence with useless words, the way his attention had been steady and sincere, and she felt a sharp ache, not of desire, but of recognition, as if she had glimpsed a version of herself that still existed somewhere beneath routine and disappointment. And over the next few days she became aware of how often she replayed that short moment on the roadside, how it contrasted with the emptiness of her evenings, the meals eaten in near silence, the conversations reduced to logistics and schedules, and she wondered when exactly her marriage had shifted from partnership to habit, when love had turned into something maintained rather than felt, and though she tried to focus on her responsibilities, on being grateful for stability and comfort, the thought of Daniel lingered like a question she had never allowed herself to ask, because if a few quiet minutes with a man everyone avoided could make her feel seen, what did that say about the life she was living? And somewhere deep inside, beneath guilt and caution, a small, unsettling curiosity began to grow, one that whispered that perhaps the stories about Daniel Brooks were not the full truth, and perhaps the real danger was not the man everyone warned her about, but the silence she had accepted for far too long. Despite her efforts to forget him, Daniel Brooks kept appearing in Emily Carter's thoughts, a presence she couldn't shake, and it seemed fate had a way of pulling them together again, as weeks later she found herself wandering through the farmer's market, drawn not by necessity, but by a strange, inexplicable curiosity, and there he was behind a stall, arranging fresh vegetables with careful, deliberate hands, his face calm and unreadable, the way it always seemed to be, while the town's usual crowd passed him by, polite but distant, leaving him unnoticed in the midst of their chatter, and Emily stopped, hesitant, heart beating a little faster, unsure whether to approach, yet compelled by a force she didn't understand, and when their eyes met, recognition sparked quietly between them, neither smiling, yet neither looking away, and she started talking, first about the weather, then about the market, small and safe topics, yet every word between them carried weight she couldn't explain. Because Daniel had a way of listening that felt rare, almost sacred, as if he was giving more than attention, he was giving understanding without judgment. The kind of presence Emily hadn't realized she had missed so deeply, and with him, silence was comfortable, not awkward, each pause allowing thought and feeling to settle naturally, unlike the hurried, distracted environment of her home with Mark, where silence was heavy and uncomfortable, filled with unspoken resentments and forgotten desires. And Daniel didn't pry into her life, didn't ask about her marriage or her reasons for being at the market, and that restraint made her want to speak, made her want to share parts of herself she had hidden for years. Yet she stopped herself, knowing it wasn't the right time, not fully aware that timing had never mattered for her emotions, only the courage to acknowledge them. And then, as the afternoon stretched, Daniel invited her to walk with him along the edge of his fields, an offer that sounded innocent enough, but carried an undertone of something more, a quiet intimacy that wasn't physical but emotional, and Emily agreed, stepping onto the muddy path beside his expansive land, feeling the air shift around them as if it carried new possibilities, and he began to share his past, his voice steady, recounting a marriage that ended quietly, not with anger or betrayal, but with neglect and miscommunication, a slow drifting apart that left both people too afraid to speak until it was too late. And as he spoke, Emily realized that his story mirrored her own fears, her own sense of being unseen, unheard, slowly fading in a life that had once promised love and partnership, and she listened without interruption, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief, as if hearing someone else's pain validated her own. And they walked further, the sun beginning its slow descent, painting the fields in gold and shadow, and Daniel paused at a bend in the path, gesturing toward the wide open land, saying softly that this was the point where most people chose to turn back, a gentle acknowledgement of boundaries, of choices, of the reality that some roads are long and uncertain. And Emily felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, a mixture of fear and longing, because standing there, in the quiet of his world, she realized she was at a crossroads, not just of geography but of heart, caught between a life that was safe but unfulfilling and a connection that felt alive yet fragile. And as they turned back toward the market path, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the space between them, the words unspoken, the emotions barely touched, and she understood that this moment, this walk, had already changed her in ways she couldn't yet define, planting seeds of hope, curiosity, and a gentle reckoning that would grow whether she wanted it to or not. And by the time she returned home, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside her had only begun, leaving her restless, awake, and aware of the emptiness in her own life, while Daniel Brooks, unaware of the impact he had made, continued his work, tending fields and produce with the same quiet strength, his presence lingering in her thoughts like a whisper she couldn't ignore. And Emily knew, deep down, that she would see him again, that this connection, fragile as it was, demanded attention, reflection, and a courage she hadn't used in years. And though she tried to tell herself it was harmless, a simple human interaction, the truth was that the encounter had stirred emotions she thought she had buried. Emotions that made her feel alive, vulnerable, and for the first time in a long while, fully present in her own story. Emily Carter found herself walking a delicate line between two worlds, the one she had always known with Mark, safe and predictable yet increasingly empty, and the one slowly opening before her with Daniel Brooks, a man whose quiet presence made her feel alive in ways she had long forgotten. And she began to weave small lies, not malicious, not dramatic, but soft and careful. Telling Mark she was working late, stepping out for errands, taking walks that stretched longer than necessary, all while avoiding the truth that drew her to Daniel's world, to his farm, his steady voice, and the unspoken understanding that existed between them, because with him she could laugh freely, speak without measuring every word, and feel seen in ways that made her chest ache, and yet nothing improper occurred. They shared moments that were emotional, deep, and stirring, a connection built on honesty and attentive listening rather than any physical intimacy, and that made the pull between them stronger, more complicated, and all the more dangerous in its subtlety, because she had never experienced a bond so profound without it crossing boundaries of trust and propriety, and the tension of holding these two lives at once weighed heavily on her, a constant hum in her thoughts, and Mark began to notice, not with anger but with confusion, a quiet worry as he questioned her absence, his voice gentle yet probing, forcing Emily to confront the truth she had been avoiding, that her heart and mind were straying in ways she couldn't fully control, and she wanted to tell him everything, that she felt lonely, invisible, neglected, but words had grown difficult in a marriage defined more by habit than by attention, and instead, she swallowed the explanations, feeling guilt tighten her chest even as longing for Daniel expanded it, because he never pressured her, never demanded more than she was willing to give emotionally, yet the way he drew her out, the way he made her feel alive, was intoxicating in its simplicity, and Daniel, aware of the subtle bond forming, began to pull back with quiet wisdom, telling her that he didn't want to be a place of escape, that he wanted to be chosen honestly or not at all, words that struck deep, because they were fair, truthful, and full of integrity, forcing Emily to reckon with her desires, her fears, and the reality that life often asks us to make hard choices between comfort and authenticity, and as nights passed with her lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of two lives pressing against her, she realized that indecision itself was a choice, one that could cost her more than she could bear, and the tension built relentlessly, each encounter with Daniel sharpening her awareness of what she had been missing, what her marriage had quietly lost over time, and what she truly longed for in connection, presence, and recognition, and by the time she walked the familiar paths between her home and the farm, Emily understood that emotional honesty demanded courage, that love could not be measured by convenience, and that to continue in silence was to betray both herself and those she cared about, while Daniel's quiet strength and unwavering respect for boundaries made every moment with him feel both safe and exhilarating, and the realization settled into her bones that change was inevitable, that she could no longer avoid the choices before her, and that the journey toward truth, no matter how painful, was the only path that could lead her to a life where she felt fully alive, seen, and capable of loving without compromise, and the inner storm of longing, guilt, hope, and fear intensified, leaving Emily at the edge of transformation, aware that the coming decisions would shape not just her future but the emotional landscapes of everyone around her, and in that space, between two men, two lives, and two kinds of love, she recognized that clarity was coming, whether she was ready or not, and that the next steps she took would demand bravery, honesty, and a willingness to face the heart's true desires. Emily Carter finally reached a point where she could no longer ignore the truth of her heart, realizing that honesty was the only way forward, and she sat Mark down one evening, her voice steady though her hands shook, telling him plainly that she had been unhappy, that years of feeling invisible and unheard had built a quiet distance between them, that she loved him, but had been longing for connection in ways their marriage no longer provided, and Mark listened, truly listened, for the first time, his usual calm presence now mixed with surprise and quiet sorrow, as he tried to understand the depth of her feelings, the years of silence that had grown between them, and though his response was compassionate, acknowledging her pain and accepting responsibility for his part, it became clear that love alone could not repair what had been neglected for so long. And they made the difficult, mutual decision to separate, not with anger or accusations, but with sadness and respect, recognizing that sometimes the kindest choice is to let go, even when the heart still carries affection. Months passed with Emily navigating the unfamiliar space of independence, learning to hear her own thoughts and honor her own needs, until she felt ready to return to the farm that had become a symbol of possibility, an emotional refuge, and when she arrived, Daniel Brooks greeted her not with grand gestures, but with the quiet steadiness that had drawn her in from the beginning, offering only a simple promise. He would walk beside her if she chose, but he would never try to rescue her or fill spaces she did not willingly open, and in that honesty, Emily found a freedom she had never experienced, a love untainted by pretense, full of understanding and patience, where feelings could grow without pressure and trust could form naturally, and as they sat together on the porch overlooking the wide fields, she felt the weight of years of longing, loss, and hope settle into a gentle warmth, realizing that real love is not always loud or dramatic, but often quiet, steady, and rooted in the courage to face truth, to accept risk, and to embrace vulnerability. And in Daniel's presence, she finally understood that being seen, being valued, and being allowed to feel fully alive was more powerful than anything she had imagined, that the past could not be changed but the future could be shaped with honesty and care. And as she reached out to him, feeling his hand in hers, Emily knew that while the journey ahead would not be without challenges, it would be authentic, mutual, and deeply human, and that the story of her heart, once shadowed by loneliness and restraint, had begun a new chapter filled with courage, tenderness, and the possibility of true, lasting connection. A chapter that would be remembered not for scandal or whispers, but for the quiet bravery of two people choosing to see each other fully, to respect boundaries, and to allow love to grow in its own time, leaving behind the pain of what was lost and stepping into a life where honesty, patience, and emotional presence created a bond far stronger than anything superficial. And in that realization, Emily finally breathed freely, knowing that some stories do not need grand finales to matter. They only need the courage to be lived authentically, with heart open, and with love offered without compromise.